But first, the Albanese government's so-called productivity summit is shaping up as a tax summit. And the one tax it seems they want on the table and is gathering support is the return of some sort of carbon tax. Now, this is a government that's addicted to spending and addicted to union power. Its union addiction means that it can't address labour productivity, and its spending addiction means that it needs more and more revenue. Hence the near certainty of new taxes if the ocean of red ink is ever to be drained. And what better tax than one that supposedly saves the planet? Especially one that's just been publicly supported by former Treasury boss Ken Henry, the mining giant Rio Tinto, the ACTU, and a whole lot of academic economists who should spend more time in the real world.
You think it's time to reconsider a carbon tax?
What do we mean by reconsider? Why the hell did we ever drop it? I mean, that's the question, right? It still boggles the mind that we had the world's best carbon policy and then, for purely political reasons, decided that we could afford to do without it.
Give me a break, Ken Henry. We didn't drop it. It was an election issue. The election was lost on the idea of keeping the carbon tax, won on the idea of repealing it, and it was a decision of the Parliament. It wasn't a political whim of anyone. Now, there are three fundamental problems with a carbon tax. First, there's no election mandate for one. Indeed, as I just said, the only mandate out there is to repeal carbon taxes, which is what Tony Abbott did when he won his landslide victory against the Gillard carbon tax and Rudd in 2013. Second, a revisited carbon tax will just be another cost on top of all the other costs associated with reducing emissions. And third, it won't save the planet because any further cut in emissions that we might secure here in Australia will be lost amidst the massive emission increases coming from China and India as they strive to raise their people's standard of living. Yet there's no doubt the Albanese government is desperate for money and it would like to avenge its 2013 humiliation. Remember Julia Gillard's pledge during the campaign in 2010.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
And remember the subsequent political marriage, that ceremony with Bob Brown to secure minority government, that Labor promised that a carbon tax would help them get over the line. And all of Julia Gillard's squirming and obfuscations before she ended up conceding that, yes, her carbon price was a tax.
I'm not going to get hung up on word games about how you describe various pricing mechanisms, and I've been very upfront with people. With a fixed price, it's effectively like a tax.
One of the arguments that Labor will use to justify a carbon tax is that the most efficient way to reduce emissions, they'll say, and that it will substitute for all the green schemes currently costing taxpayers and consumers billions. Indeed, almost $30 billion we've spent on all these green dreams over the past decade. That's according to figures from the Centre for Independent Studies. But a new carbon tax to cut all other green spending? Well, that'll never happen. In the same way that the GST was supposed to mean an end to the numerous inefficient state taxes, well, that never happened either. We got the GST, the states kept all their taxes, and as you know, they've added a whole lot more since then. You see, the reason why we have all of these subsidies is because wind and solar are never economic on their own. Because we need electricity 24/7, not just when the wind's blowing and the sun's shining, and that's not going to change under a carbon tax. Without the renewable subsidies and mandates, people would just pay extra for fossil fuels. So any carbon tax will end up just another green impost on top of all the others. To overcome people's instinctive aversion to new taxes, well, Labor will be counting on the sense of moral obligation to save the planet, given a whole lot of our young people in particular have been persuaded, or I'd rather express it as brainwashed, that the planet's in crisis and CO2 emissions are solely to blame. But what's the point of being a green martyr if, despite all the economic pain in Australia, it's an entirely futile gesture? For instance, since 2005, Australia has reduced its emissions by 29%, from 610 to 433 million tonnes. But in order to do this, real electricity prices, well, they have doubled. That's why our heavy industry is demanding subsidies or migrating offshore. Meanwhile, in the period that our emissions have fallen by 177 million tonnes a year, China's emissions have more than doubled from 6.3 billion to 13 billion tonnes. Now think of it. Our 177 million tonne reduction is totally overwhelmed by China's 6 billion tonne increase, meaning their increase is over 30 times our decrease. See why it's futile? And that's ignoring all the other countries that pay lip service on climate change while increasing their emissions in order to strengthen their economies. But it gets worse. Not only have we handicapped ourselves economically already, but if we continue down this path, we will disqualify ourselves from the coming artificial intelligence revolution. Because if there's one thing AI needs, like air to breathe, it's a superabundance of cheap power. And this is a big part why Europe and the United States are moving as fast as they are on nuclear power, because they do not want to be left behind in the AI race. Now, you've heard me say this before. Energy is the economy, and the economy is our wealth. A carbon tax will just speed us down the road to ruin, especially if it's not accompanied by any move towards zero emissions nuclear power.